Welcome back to Dan91's Garage. This week I want to get the interior put back together on the Starlet, and that means installing the DET3 piggyback ECU. So I had made a plug and play harness for it, and my mate wanted me to make him one. The problem was I haven't really got the time for that at the moment, so he waved a bunch of readies under my nose and now he owns that harness. So we're going to cut it into the Toyota loom as it was intended to be. No point messing about, guys. See you in a sec. So we've got our DET3 with the harness preloaded there, so see power, ground, analog in and out, and ignition in and out. That's what we've got for that one. It's the basic install. Like I said, we've pre-cut all of the heat shrink we're going to need, and I've also pre-cut and cleaned the splices that I'm going to use. So they're open barrel splices, so obviously power and ground is spliced in and the others are an intercept, but you can use red butt connectors. But the thing is, if you keep using red butt connectors, there'll be, in this particular install, for the minimum install, you'll have 4 red butt connectors kind of all in the same place. So sometimes it helps if you can stagger your cuts. So obviously the butt connectors are then going to be sort of higher or lower, because when you try and sort of tape up the loom afterwards, you've got just this giant sort of cluster of, you know, sort of the red butt connectors all in one place. So I'm going to use these smaller ones with some heat shrink, so they're going to be a lot easier to tape up and tuck back into the loom. So the most important thing to remember is obviously take your time, do one wire at a time. It doesn't matter how long it takes, no one's going to care. Just do it right, be calm, one wire at a time. So first things first, we'll pop over to the car. So this is the first wire, obviously it's going to be for power. So this is plus B, which is obviously a switch 12 volt positive. So I've D-pinned it from the plug using my little D-pinning tool. So that way it gives us a lot easier access to the whole of the wire. And this is the only wire we've got to sort of play with on the smaller A plug anyway. So that's cool. So I've picked my place. That obviously goes about there. And I want to splice into it somewhere up here, because when we put those back together, they'll like cross over in the middle. So I'm going to go just above that. So there we have it. First one's in. Let me slide down our heat shrink. Thankfully we remembered to put that on. So then we can heat shrink him up. Put this back into plug A so we don't forget where he came from, and then move on to the next wire. Obviously I'm not going to show you all of this because I have made a separate video which you can go and look at. I'll link it at the end of this video to show you the exact process of doing all the wires for a basic install. But I have got a couple of little extra things I'm doing, so I'll show you the extra wires that I'm doing and why I'm doing them. But yeah, that's cool. Like I say, one thing at a time, concentrate on what you're doing and she'll be right. So yep, I'll carry on with this. So we'll go on to, I think, the ground wire next, because that's the only other splice we're doing. And we've got another wire to splice into that as well. So this is the wire which we're going to use for the data signal to take the wideband O2 output from the gauge to the DET3. So I've already crimped on the pin to go into the DET3 on analog 3. And this is the twisted pair of wires that we took out of the original gauge wiring, because we D-pinned it from that end, because these are for sort of CAN bus things we're not using. So I thought I might as well just repurpose the wire. So the green one is going to go to earth with the earth from this. Now the earth from this has the option of connecting to 3 different things according to the AEM manual. It either goes to a differential output for analog, negative, but the DET3 doesn't have that. It can go to a sensor ground, but the DET3 doesn't have that either. The Toyota ECU does have a sensor ground, but that's on the Toyota ECU and not on the DET3. So the AEM said if you don't have any of those on the logging or ECU you're connecting it to, which is the DET3, then to just connect it into the same ground that is connected to. So yeah, there we go. Thankfully that went all right. It's obviously the more wires you have bundled in, the harder it can get. So you obviously got to try and keep the ends of each of them lined up and make sure you don't crimp onto the actual insulation or anything. So there we go. Yeah, we've got 2 of those wires crimped onto one, crimped up nice. And thankfully the small heat shrink I've got can do 3 of these wires. So that's the only sort of 2-into-1 we've got. So I'll heat shrink him up and then we can go on to the intercepts. And here we go with the first intercept. So this is always scary when you just chop into your wiring loom. So there you go, that's the first one. So position B4, so that's front row closest towards you from this end. 1, 2, 3, 4, light green wire. This is for the map sensor. So we've obviously got to intercept that signal, send the true signal into the DET3 where we modify it in the table, and then we send the modified signal out to the ECU to get it to do the fueling that we want. So I'll strip both ends. So on the DET3, because we've obviously got a green wire on the wiring harness, I've also color coded it to the DET3 with solid green and green with a black stripe. I'm just going to crimp them on basically with an open barrel splice. These are the points where you can use the sort of red butt connectors if you want to, but one of mine kind of naturally wants to go like that, so we're going that way with one, and then we'll follow the other way round and going sort of like the normal way for the one coming from the loom. So yeah, I'll carry on with those. These aren't particularly exciting, so I'll get all these intercepts done. There's only 2 intercepts, this one and the ignition signal, so I'll get them done, and then I've got one more to show you after that. So there we have it. We're all pretty much done with the DET3 stuff into the loom. I've just got one more wire I want to play with. So if you remember, the narrowband oxygen sensor signal, that comes in on wire B10, and on the original plug and play harness that I was going to use, I had a switch on that so I can turn off the narrowband signal so the Toyota ECU can't perform closed loop fuel trims. So that way it'll only be in open loop and can't readjust any of the fuel that I put in with that. So we'll take him out and chop him so we can put some wires in for a switch. So I'll just get the D-pin tool again. So the loom end of B10 from the sensor goes to a little sort of 4.8mm spade. The other end, obviously, I had some of the female receptacles for this plug from making the plug and play harness, so I've attached some 20 gauge wire to that, and that obviously feeds a signal into the Toyota ECU when I want it and when I don't, so that's cool. So yeah, just the wideband O2 signal obviously. So these are the other ends of the wire, they come down from the harness from the gauge. So there we are, all sorted. So brown for the analog out, negative went to ground, and obviously white for the signal went to white with black, and that follows through to here. White with black goes in on analog 3, and the other end of the green wire goes up and is already spliced in with the earths that we did as our second step. So there we go, bit of taping it up just to neaten it all up and obviously protect everything. Obviously the edges of this are a bit sharp, the sort of like the sheet steel they use for the front and back of these cases is pretty sharp. So, and I've used heat shrink for this but not shrunk it down. I should use obviously a proper PVC sort of sheathing, but I don't have any, so I'm not going to spend £5 on a piece of sheathing when this will do an adequate job, although obviously it's not the right material for it. So that'll do something for abrasion resistance, and it saves me taping up that entire length. So yeah, a bit of tidying up in here with some cable ties or something and whatever, but I think we'll give it a test start as it is, just to make sure before we button everything up. Then the good news is we can put the rest of the interior back together. So this was the last thing I was sort of waiting for. So we're doing a bit of a test run at the moment. So I've switched off, let's wait for the fan to shut up. So I've switched off the narrowband O2 sensor so that at idle the Toyota ECU can't pull back the fueling, because I just want to have a quick play in the fuel table. So this is where we're idling, and I've just selected the area around it, and we're hovering around 14, and it can't adjust itself because I've disconnected the narrowband signal. So if we add 10 points of fuel into there, you can see that we've now gone from 14 down to 13-ish. So if we then take that fuel out back to 0, we should come up to about 14 and a bit. So there we go, back to 14, and now I'm going to take out 10 points. You hear the engine stumble, and now around 15, 16. Now that is a bit lean obviously, but I'm just playing at idle, so I'm not too worried about that. So there you go, 15.0. So back up to plus 10 points of fuel there, so back to 13 again, and if we take it back to 0, it should go to around 14. So there we go, holding at 14, so we'll add 5. I'll Takes it down to 13.5, 13.4. Had another 5. Takes us down to 13.8. So there we go, we know the fuel works. And we know that the switch I put in on that particular wire, B10, does turn off the narrowband O2 and does turn off closed loop fuel corrections. So yeah, a little bit of taping up time now. So just, yeah, some electrical tape, just sort of spiral wrap that. Just try and keep all of the sort of joined or cut wires arrested in some way, so they're not constantly like pulling on the joins. So that's wrapped up to there. I've wrapped down to the point where the positive comes out of that single loom there. A couple of bands of tape around here. I have got some other sort of plastic sort of sheathing that I'll put over this bit, the sort of spiral wrap on stuff. And then we've got to figure out what we're going to do with that. But yeah, taped up where obviously the 2 wires come down from the 2 different sides of this sort of mini loom, and then a little bit onto the end of the sheathing for that. So yeah, not entirely sure what we're going to do with that. There's tons of slack. Thankfully I left tons of slack on that wire there, so we can figure out what we're going to do with that. But it's lunchtime, so I'm going to go have my lunch, pick this one up in the afternoon. So there we go then. Glove box is back in. Det 3, I made a little sort of plinth for him to sit on, just this little like plate thing that I've cable tied him on, obviously, and a little foam foot so he doesn't sort of rattle around in there too much. Obviously connected up the vacuum reference from the manifold into the Det 3. Got a little bit of sort of anti-chafe going on for that part, because obviously when we close this up, those wires want to rub against the ECU a little bit. So put a bit of tape on there. I don't want to put too much tape on it because I want it to be flexible, so that's on there. I am going to probably replace that spiral wrap with some smaller diameter stuff, but it'll do for today anyway. And there's obviously the little switch there at the back that turns the narrowband O2 sensor off, so that's cool. So that all shuts up, everything clears, and nothing touches anything it shouldn't. Then moving into here to the coiled Viper that is all of the sort of spare wires we've got from the wideband O2 and everything. So yeah, that's the join. That's the join between the 2 sets of wires, and I can separate those if I want. So that's all strapped down. Everything's clear. Nothing's going to rub on anything metallic. So you don't want it to go down the road bouncing, because not only can it fatigue wires, but if it's rubbing against stuff, it can obviously chafe through and then cause short circuits, which is not something we want. So I guess kind of the last piece of the puzzle is the blanking plate we've made, just the doubled in. So that's it all finished off now. So he just drops in there. Put the screws back in, and then we can sort the fascia out. So on the centre console, obviously we're going to have to pop this blanking plug out, so there's just a couple of little tabs you have to press in. Try and do it one-handed with the GoPro. That's the other side, and then your blanking piece comes out. So that's obviously where a switch would be on a non-poverty spec model. So that's that one. And that's obviously where we're going to thread our wires through for the wideband. Obviously I can't do that one-handed, so there we have it all back together. So Det 3 nicely nestled in the glove box there. And we close that up, obviously I won't be any the wiser. Blanking plate, I'm going to leave it bare aluminium for the moment. I may end up putting switches or something else in there. Centre console back in, cable tied on the vent there, one to hold them together. Rev counter, SR clocks, all sorted. Finally the boost gauge over that side, so POV for when I'm driving's about there. So yeah, neither of the new dials obscure any of the view out of the front screen or anything. This one's kind of hidden behind the pillar, which is nice. And like I say, I can see both of them over the steering wheel, and I can just about see the clock as well. So yeah, happy with that. So that's it for this week. The interior's back together, ready to go. So we're going to pop back in the engine bay, finish off a few more jobs, take it from there. Thanks ever so much for watching, guys. I couldn't do it without you. Thank you all so much for your support. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you on the next episode.